welcome to Soarin Hawkland. My name is Jan, obviously not Bob. Bob is on a well-deserved trip out in Utah, adding another bird to his life list. So Bob, if you're tuning in, I hope you got that Cassius crossbill. In the meantime, I am here to talk about birds that are large, that soar, that are sometimes predators, but are not raptors. So I hope you'll stick with me as we talk about cranes.
Yay!
We'll start over here at the slideshow.
We like cheering. Just so.
Yay!
Okay, everybody, I'm just getting this in place.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
She's gonna get it all nice for the audience.
There we go. I think that will work.
Thanks, Gigi. Okay, so cranes do occupy a lot of North America. Some of us, I know we've got people tuning in from all over the country. Some of us may have them nesting near us. Some of them may have us migrate through. Some of us may only see them when we're traveling, but they are really great birds. Cranes live all over the world on 6 continents out of 7. And throughout time and space, they've really grabbed people's attention and has inspired them. Couple reasons for this. First of all, they're big birds, kind of like our raptors. They can be 3, 4, 5 feet tall. They are noisy, so they're hard to miss. And they're also very sociable. They kind of remind me of people in some ways. Some of the ways that people have been inspired by them over time are we can see in our current culture. First of all, cranes, in their social activities, they dance. And indigenous people on 3 continents, Asia, Australia, and North America, have allowed some of these dances to inspire some of their own folk dances. Cranes are very wary. So in Christian lore, cranes are held up as examples of how we should be wary of sin. Cranes tend to be long-lived, and they mate for life. So in Asia, particularly China and Japan, cranes are held up as examples of love and steadfastness and faithfulness. And in North America, some of the indigenous Native American tribes also see cranes as carriers of the seasons. One other way we may see crane influence in our daily life is in our alphabet. It is said that the Greek, I can just put that right there.
All right.
In Greek alphabet, some of the letters were inspired by the formations that cranes make when they are migrating. Now, of course, this is the Greek alphabet, so if this was our alphabet, we'd call this a V. The Greeks call this lambda. Then in the Greek alphabet, we also have alpha, which of course we now call capital A. And another letter, believed to be inspired by the forms cranes take when they migrate, is upsilon, otherwise known as our capital Y. So next time you're writing, just think about how those letters might have been inspired by cranes thousands of years ago. So in North America, we have 2 species of crane. On the left there, that grayish bird is a sandhill crane. It is the most common crane in North America and the most common crane in the world. Then on the right, our white crane is the whooping crane, the least common crane in North America and one of the rarest birds on the continent and the rarest crane in the world. Let's talk about the whooping cranes for a minute. This infographic tells you that we have just over 800 birds in the entire world. You see a bunch of numbers down here. Cranes in captivity, 159. The 2 numbers we really want to focus on today are this one, the migratory flock in the west that has 504 birds, and the migratory flock in the east that has 85. Now, these birds were never numerous in North America. It is estimated that when Europeans came to the continent, there were maybe 2,000 birds. Their scarcity became their peril, however, because by the late 1800s, the prominent American culture had learned how to take resources from the wild for their own profit. And people saw these birds and said, hey, these are rare birds. I could shoot one and stuff it, and in a museum we'll spend a lot of money on it. Or, hey, I found some eggs. I'm going to sell those and get a lot of money. And that's what happened. By 1940, we had 20 whooping cranes left. 20. So the fact that we're up to 826 now is good news. Now, the whooping crane is North America's tallest bird. It weighs about 15 pounds, and I want to show you how big its wingspan is. It has one of the largest wingspans in North America as well. A wingspan of 7.5 feet.
Wow.
It is larger than the bald eagle. Sorry, it's larger than the turkey vulture. Sorry, Poe. The only two birds that have a larger wingspan are the American white pelican at 9 feet and the California condor at 9.5. So it's a pretty impressive bird. So after 1940, thankfully, there were some environmental and hunting laws passed to protect the crane from going extinct. And so what happened was we had protections for this flock of 500, that is now 500 birds. They winter down here in Texas. That's the only place. They breed way up here in Canada. That's the only place. And so by protecting this and preventing hunting, these birds started to make a comeback. But they still weren't real numerous in the 1970s, and scientists thought, you know what? Having just one migratory flock that's not real big is kind of like having all your eggs in one basket. So they hatched a plan to establish an eastern migratory flock, and that's what we're seeing here. We have, they will winter anywhere from here to Florida, and they breed up here. Now, in order for that to happen, they had to try a bunch of things. What they established was a plan in the early 1990s where they would take eggs from captive whooping cranes, and they would be raised by, look how serious those scientists are.
Oh, wow.
They are dressed as whooping cranes. Before these birds were ever hatched, they heard two sounds. They heard the sound of a whooping crane and the sound of an ultralight plane. After these birds were hatched, these scientists never let them see a human form. One hand, you can't really see, but the one hand, that right hand, is a whooping crane shaped head. Then when it came time for them to migrate, the reason they played the ultralight sound for them to imprint was because then in fall, these serious scientists, and this is a costume scientist here, led the youngsters to Florida, taught them to migrate. The cool thing is, once they learned to go one direction, they knew how to migrate back.
Oops. Sorry, everybody.
It's all right. It's a little turbulence, that's all. So over time, this was called Operation Migration, along with the International Crane Fund. And these ultralight guided migrations happened through the year 2016. After that, the birds are kind of doing it on their own. We've got 85 birds in the eastern population, 17 of which were born in the wild. So it's not like a slam dunk, yep, we got our eastern migratory population, but we are on our way, which is pretty exciting. So anybody who lives along that migration corridor, keep an eye out. All right, the most numerous crane we have in the world and in North America is the sandhill crane. If you look at that map, the orange areas, both the lighter orange and the darker orange, those are places you will see them during the breeding season. The blue is where you will see them during the winter. And then the yellow is where you might see them only during migration. There are 6 races of sandhill cranes, which means, yes, they can interbreed, but they also have their distinct characteristics. The most common are the lesser sandhill crane, followed by the greater sandhill crane, and then there's the Canada sandhill crane, and then there are 3 non-migratory species that live in Cuba. There's a little splotch right there, if you can see that, in Alabama, and then in Florida. Now, the lessers and the graders are what I'll pretty much talk about because those comprise about 90-95% of our birds. Lesser and greater sandhill cranes do differ significantly in size if they're purely lessers and graders. Again, they can interbreed, so we can have a spectrum here. But lessers are 6 to 7 pounds, might be 3 to 3.5 feet tall, and have a wingspan that's still pretty impressive at 5 feet. But greater sandhills, 10 to 14 pounds, 4.5 to 5 feet tall, wingspan over 6 feet. Now, where are they? The greater sandhills tend to be on the eastern portion here. The lessers tend to be west. So if you live near Soarin over here in Indiana, you're going to be seeing mostly greater sandhill cranes. You can't tell the males and females apart by looking at them. Vocally, you can. And they can live to be 30 years of age, wow, assuming everything goes right, which in nature, not everything does. This picture does feature both lessers and graders, so you can see the difference between the two. Okay, so sometimes people see a crane or a heron and aren't sure which is which. So there are a number of species of herons in North America. Probably the most common and probably the easiest to confuse with a sandhill crane would be a great blue heron. So as you see here, the sandhill crane is a gray bird. Typically, there will be an exception I'll talk about in a minute. And they have this nice bright red cap. The great blue heron is a grayish bird. You could probably argue it has bluish tints to it. It has a bright yellow spear bill, where the cranes have a dark one, and then they have this dark band on their head. All right, so that is one way to tell them apart. If they vocalize, that would be another, and I'll get to that in a second. Also, if they're flying overhead, if you see a big bird, you know it's not a raptor because there's going to be long legs trailing behind. It's also a way you know it's not a goose because they don't have long legs either. The difference between a heron and a crane is how they hold their necks. The great blue herons tuck their necks in. The cranes stick their necks out. One way to remember that is crane begins with CR and so does cross. So yes, wood storks do the same thing, but they're not part of this conversation. So, and they don't live in northern Indiana. So that is a way to tell apart these two very common birds, even when they're flying overhead, if they're not vocalizing. Now there was a naturalist named Aldo Leopold. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. He was one of the real founders of the conservation movement in the 1900s. He started working with the Forest Service, studied ecology, did a lot to try to promote an ethic called a land ethic, where people saw themselves as part of the ecology and not conquerors of it. He wrote a book called the Sand County Almanac. I highly recommend it. Wonderful essays about the life on his Wisconsin farm, insights into how ecology works, and a little bit into people. He had cranes. And in one of his essays, this is what he wrote about the sandhill crane. The last crane will trumpet his farewell and spiral skyward from the great marsh. And then a silence never to be broken, unless perchance in some far pasture of the Milky Way. He wrote this in the 1940s. So when we think back to the whooping cranes, 1940 there were only 20 birds. In 1940 there were only 1,000 sandhill cranes left, and he was afraid that they were going to go extinct. And he had good reason. In the eastern population, you can see as breeding birds, they disappeared from Illinois in 1890, Iowa in 1905, Ohio in 1926. Indiana was a bit of a holdout until 1929. Again, hunting regulations, wetland regulations, things like that did allow some of these birds to start to return. In 1982, they began breeding again in Indiana, just north of here in the northeast corner of Indiana, in a place called Steuben County, where there is a state park called Pokagon State Park. So, fortunately, what he feared has not come to pass. In fact, they've been recovering really nicely. The eastern sandhill cranes, the ones that are primarily east of the Mississippi River, by the 1980s, there were 16,000 birds in just that population alone, and now we're up to 80 to 100,000 birds. So the recovery has happened nicely. In the lesser sandhill crane, we are now up to well over 500,000 birds. So certainly no longer endangered. It is now actually a game bird in at least 16 states. I have not eaten one. I hear they're delicious. People call them ribeye of the sky. So I don't know if I'm ever offered one, if I'll taste it or not. Well, I just have to see.
Yeah.
So let's talk about mostly about the sandhill cranes, because those are what we're more likely to see anywhere on this continent. Of course, the migration patterns for different populations in different parts of the country differ. But here in northern Indiana, sometime in mid to late February, we get an unusual wind from the south, and it brings mild weather, and we all get a little spring fever. And I always step outside to kind of enjoy the milder air, and very often I am pleasantly surprised by a sound which I forgot to take out of my purse. So I hear these cranes up in the sky. Let me play the sound for you. Once you've heard it, it is pretty unmistakable. Now, often you hear more than just one. It can be a whole cacophonous mess of those sounds. And the flocks can have anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred birds. They may be flying in formation, they may be soaring in circles. But let me tell you, as soon as I hear it, I gasp, I look up, my eyes get big, and I know spring's coming. It may be a ways away, but those birds tell me that spring will win. Now, the reason we can hear this call is that these birds have a really long trachea. Now, your trachea is your windpipe. So it starts at your throat, it goes down to your lungs, and when you take a deep breath, you feel cool air in there. So our trachea is just a few inches long. A sandhill crane has a trachea 26 inches long. Now, their neck may be at least a good foot, maybe even 15 inches long, so you figure they're going to have a longer windpipe than we do. But it's so long that it actually winds up in their keel before it connects with their lungs. All right, and this very long trachea enables them to make that rattle noise and enables them to make it real loud. It can be heard up to 2 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah, so trumpeter swans also have long trachea. That's why they've got their name, and they can be heard a long way as well. So when cranes vocalize, could be for a number of reasons. Could be to warn their friends that there's danger. It could be that when they're migrating, especially in a large group, they do that to keep track of their family members. They can recognize each other's voices, because when they travel in a crowd, it would be easy to lose your mate or your young ones. Another reason is this very important call called the unison call. Now, the unison call. The unison call is between a male and a female. That first lower sound was the male. The second louder sound with the two sounds was the female. They'll do this back and forth and back and forth. Particularly after they've established their mating grounds, it helps to reinforce the pair bond, kind of guess like them singing to each other. But another thing is, scientists believe that this unison call helps bring both of their reproductive systems into synchronicity so that when they attempt to reproduce, they are successful. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Now, why do birds migrate? Well, why do cranes migrate? For the primary reason that birds migrate for either feeding or breeding. So sandhill cranes eat vegetation, seeds, tubers. They also will forage for insects, worms, crayfish, frogs, things like that. As you might imagine, when the ground freezes, especially when it gets covered with snow, foraging for food is pretty difficult. So, late fall, they take off and head south. The eastern population goes more to Florida. The western population goes more to Texas and northern Mexico. They stay there a few months until it's time to come back. Why do they leave if there's ample food down there? Well, when you raise your young, you need space, you need territory. They need about at least a third of a square acre for nesting. So then they migrate back north in order to have enough space for nesting. This is a migratory flock. Looks like they're doing an upsilon for us. If I have it loud enough. Oops, I just stopped it. Well, that wasn't very helpful. Or maybe it just stopped on its own. So they migrate for feeding and then for breeding. And actually, this flock is coming back from foraging. They're going to roost in a wetland. I'll talk about that in a minute. When they arrive at their breeding grounds, they are often in the company of last year's colt if they're lucky enough to still have one. So you can see in this picture which one the colt is, and a colt is the term for the baby crane or the young crane. You can see the adults, the parents, have this red patch on their head. The young, the ones that are not ready for breeding, they start with sort of a fuzzy black down, which kind of recedes over the next year or two as they become sexually mature. Now, these parents are not going to keep Junior around as they start the next nest. They're about to kick him out or her out and say, go find some friends. And they do, and then they usually find like a non-breeding flock, and they kind of date the whole next season. They kind of meet other potential mates and sometimes try some out. Go, well, maybe not. Maybe we're not really good pair. Usually by the end of the second summer, the colts have found a mate. They may not breed for another 1 to 3 years, depending on personalities and circumstances. Parents will, once Junior's gone, they spend 2 to 4 weeks establishing their territory, then they build a nest. Now notice this nest, it is in water. Cranes feel safe in water. They roost at night in shallow wetlands, and they even tend to nest in shallow wetlands. I think it helps them hear predators coming. Female will lay 1 egg. Now, if you tuned into Bob's program last week on oology, he talked about how the egg forms and passes through the cloaca of the female. You can't lay 2 eggs at once. So the female lays 1 egg. Then a day or 2 later, she lays the second one. But she incubates right away after the first one is laid. So about 30 days later, you'll have 1 egg hatch first, and if they're both viable, another egg will hatch about 2 days later. The chicks are just cute as heck, so cute I had to get a little stuffed animal one. See my little stuffed animal? Hello. So yeah, little cute rusty things. And what happens is about 72 hours before they hatch, they start like making noise inside their egg, and the parents purr back. Again, part of that imprinting process. And then as soon as they are precocial, that's another thing Bob talked about last week, which means that within a few hours of hatching, their fuzzy down dries off. They can kind of start walking around and pecking at the ground. One adult will take that one proverbial under its wing, while the other adult waits for the other egg to hatch. If you get 2 colts, each colt will be sort of assigned to 1 adult, although the family group does stay together. Usually, only 1 colt makes it to fall, and about a third of all pairs will return in the spring with a colt. So there tends to be a high mortality. I'm sorry, but these guys are tasty morsels for a lot of predators. The eastern population, the one that lives east of the Mississippi and has been increasing in population so well, they are the exception. It is not uncommon for them to have 2 colts at the end of the summer, and a third of those pairs return in the spring with 2 colts. I have seen that here in Northeast Indiana. Here's a colt at about month, maybe 5 weeks old, still kind of rusty, but already gangly and long-legged.
Big.
But notice while the chicks are growing and going through changes of their own, the adults have gone through some changes. We talked about the cranes being gray with a red cap, but these ones are rusty. So what happens is a mating pair, as they're establishing territory for nesting, will take rotting vegetation or mud and rub it through their feathers to turn them a rusty color to help them camouflage in those wetlands. That's why the baby's born kind of rusty. Then in the meantime, once the babies are born, the birds start to molt. So here is a picture taken in late September here in Northeast Indiana of those same birds we just saw. And you can see a lot of the rusty stained feathers have fallen out and fresh ones have grown in. So here we have a pair that's got 2 babies. It's almost fall. By the time they're about 68 days old, they're able to fly. And not too long after that, they start the migration process. Now, cranes do something called staging, which means during migration, and it depends which population it is, will determine when they do this staging. But staging is basically where birds will all kind of migrate and converge on a certain area during migration and stop there and rest for as long as a month or so. They'll fatten up and power up for migration, and they'll also do a lot of socializing while they're there. The eastern population of birds tend to do this. As you can see, this dark orange is where staging happens in the fall. And so the birds that live in the eastern part of the country will stage here, and then about December 1st-ish, they'll head on down to Florida. Here, on the other side where the lesser sandhill cranes are, this is where that 500,000 to 700,000 birds will spend the winter. They will migrate up all through this area and stage there. And actually a world-famous wildlife spectacle is the crane migration in southwest Nebraska along the Platte River between Kearney and Grand Island, Nebraska. These birds will come up here They'll wait for about 4 to 6 weeks and then head on up. At any given time in this 70-mile stretch of the Platte River, you may have about 500,000 birds in a 70-mile stretch. Now, while they're all together, they have to communicate. And so this is a crane that is relaxed. One of the things they'll do is they will use that patch on their head to tell each other how they're feeling. So this crane is pretty relaxed. This crane down here is not. You can see how this patch is extended, and sometimes they'll show the next crane, look how angry I am, by putting its head down and showing that expanded red. They also do body language. These birds are indicating they're about to take off. This bird indicates that it's irritated, expanded. Tertial's on the wing, but it's saying I'm coming and hollering, and sometimes they'll even jab with their feet. They do actually have a dancing repertoire too, which we just don't have time to talk about. If you're interested in learning about that, oh, Poe wants to dance. You okay, Poe? So you might want to look for this online, the Sandhill Crane Display Dictionary. It will describe the different kinds of motions cranes do and what they indicate. When they migrate, they do what our raptors do, or many of our raptors do. They will migrate on a day. It is sunny. They will wait for the ground to warm up in the sun, because what happens is the warm air rises in a spiral that we call a thermal. So just like many of our raptors, the cranes will get in this thermal, open their wings. When they get to the top, soar to the next thermal and keep going. That way, these big birds that are anywhere from 7 to 14 pounds can migrate without expending too much energy. They can do this all day, 9.5 hours. They average about 40 miles per hour when they do this, so they can travel about 360 miles in a day. So migration is really quite a spectacle. And so in order to enjoy it for myself, I took the opportunity to go to the Platte River this year, where those hundreds of thousands of sandhill cranes move through for migration. And March 30th, before dawn, I was sitting in a bird blind on an Audubon property. That water in front of you is the Platte River. The Platte River is wide and shallow. The pioneers said it was too thick to drink and too thin to plow. But the cranes love it. They feel safe in the shallow water. So while they're migrating, they will go out into the surrounding area, whether they're natural areas or, as you might imagine, Nebraska has ample cornfields with waste corn in it. They'll go out and forage there. Then they'll come back at night and roost in the safety of this shallow water. So what I was doing there in the 20-degree cold was waiting for enough light to come for these birds to take off. I was pretty astounded at what I saw, because all the birds within viewing distance and beyond took off pretty much at once. If your volume's not up, I hope mine is, turn it up. These are clouds of birds down here.
And about how many birds are there?
Well, how many I'm seeing at once, I can't guess. I would say could be 10,000, but I don't know. But along the 70-mile stretch of the Platte, pretty much all the birds are taking off at once, and that would be up to like 500,000 or so. And you can see these clouds.
Yeah.
So it's just, I can't even begin to guess. It was awe-inspiring. It was quite amazing. So if you get the opportunity to go in between middle of March and middle of April to see that spectacle in Nebraska, I highly recommend it. So real quickly, I want to share with you a story from the Assiniboine people in North America. As I mentioned before, the cranes are credited with bringing the seasons in some of the native cultures of North America. And basically how this story goes is Way back in the time of the ancients, in the Assiniboine lands, which are pretty much north of the Missouri River and into Manitoba and Saskatchewan, it was winter all the time. It was always cold. There was always snow. The water was always frozen. One day, a small war party returned to the Assiniboine. They'd been gone quite a long time, and immediately went to the chief and said, Chief, we've been to a land, not our own, where they have a thing called summer. It's kept in a tripod. It's in the form of water in a buffalo bladder hanging on a tripod in a lodge painted yellow. It makes the air warm, the sun warms your skin, the water flows, there's abundant food, and everything is green. And the chief said, we gotta get this. And the war party said, we have a problem. For us to go take it from those people, we need to move quickly. They have horses, we do not. But the chief knew that the animals of the area would like to have summer. So before long, he had enlisted lynx, red fox, antelope, coyote, and wolf to help steal summer north. So one day, not too long later, we have lynx down outside of the town or the village where the sun was, and then we have red fox, antelope, coyote, and wolf spread out along the journey back to the Assiniboine. Lynx, who could walk without being heard, went into that lodge, stole the summer, and ran as quickly as she could. Some of that summer splashed, and where it splashed, grass and green things grew straight up. She didn't stop to look. She ran, because it didn't take long for the horsemen from the other people to be on her heels. Fortunately, she got to Red Fox in time. And Red Fox took off on fresh legs, got to Antelope before the horsemen caught up. Antelope got to Coyote before the horsemen caught up. And then Coyote got to Wolf. Wolf ran like crazy. By now, they're running on snow. And Wolf noticed that as Wolf passed with the summer in his mouth, the land behind would suddenly have no snow, and green things would be growing, and the trees would be leafing out, and even birds started to follow. So he ran as quickly as he could. He got to the river, which of course was frozen, and ran across as quickly as he could. And as he ran across, the ice behind him melted. And by the time he got to the other side of the river, it was a raging torrent. He was safely on the Assiniboine side of the river, and the horsemen were stuck, could not reach him. The horsemen pleaded, please, you have our summer. Would you consider sharing it? And to the Assiniboines' credit, they agreed. So for the next 6 moons, the Assiniboines kept the summer, and then horsemen came and ran the summer back down to the other people. And then for 6 passings of the moon, the Assiniboine have winter. Well, they liked this summer business, but the change was really fast. So one day, the chief said, hey, why don't we have the cranes carry the summer? Cranes travel in these stages. They'll fly a ways, then they'll stop and they'll rest, and then they'll fly a ways more. And that way, the summer will change gradually. And so it was. The cranes took the summer from the Assiniboine and worked their way down to the other people. And for the first time, the Assiniboines enjoyed a changing of the seasons called fall. Then, after a number of passings of the moon, they knew the cranes were on their way back because they could see subtle changes first in the plants and then in the animals and then in the temperature as summer returned. And so that's how it is that we now have the 4 seasons, summer, fall, winter, and spring, thanks to the cranes who carry the seasons for us. And so it remains. Hope you've enjoyed our little program on North American cranes. There's a lot of information on the internet, most of it good. So if you want to learn more about them, please do. Thanks for tuning in today.
Okay, thank you, Jan, for coming and helping us today.
My pleasure.
With Bob's absence. And I just wanted to put the camera over here and show our bird friends who are here. We have Ruby here, who's been patiently sitting and listening to the program. She can't see the computer, but she was listening. She's a little far down to see the monitor. And we have Nicole, who is holding Poe. And as you can tell, Poe is molting.
Yeah.
He has a lot of his the downy underneath feathers that are exposed, and he'll be getting a bunch of new feathers soon. And but there's Poe. And outside you can hear Ginger screaming. And there's Ruby again, our beautiful Ruby. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week. And thank you again, Jan.
It was my pleasure. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye-bye.